Hi, Natan.
Hi, Matthew. Good to be here.
Good to be here as well. And hello to all the viewers. Great to see you all.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Okay, let's do some introductions. So my name's Matthew Skelton. I'm from Conflux, and I'm the co-author of the book Team Topologies. I think it's fair to say the book Team Topologies has been highly influential over the last 5 years since its publication, helping organizations, leaders to think about creating a high-impact team of teams organizations.
So I'm Natan from Robusta, and we use GenAI to take Prometheus alerts and Kubernetes alerts and help teams investigate them faster by automatically surfacing up the relevant data. And we work with a lot of platform teams. I think when we first got started, I actually didn't really know the term platform engineering and what that was. And then as we started to work with more and more of those teams, we started to go, hang on, wait a minute. Why do all of our customers have that platform engineering role? What does that actually mean? So maybe that's a good starting point for this discussion. Like we're now how many years into DevOps?
Oh, loads. It's worth saying before we go a little bit further, we were going to be joined by my friend and colleague, Sarah Wells. Unfortunately, she can't join us today for some family reasons, but we might be able to follow up with some input from her at a later date, maybe like an article or a follow-up session or something like that. We were hoping to have her input. She's the author of a new book from O'Reilly around enabling microservices success. Okay, how long has DevOps been going? Well, 2008 is normally the benchmark year with the first DevOps Days conference and so on. So that's a fair old while now.
Before we talk about platform engineering, we should probably say platform engineering really has been going on for a long time too, just not called that.
Yeah, and we'll explore some of that today because it depends what we mean by platform, of course, and we'll explore that too. And then the value of seeing platforms in particular different ways helps us to navigate that space really usefully, or it might actually lock us into a way of thinking which is not very helpful. So we'll dive into those details in a bit.
You're probably the most well-known voice on platform engineering. You wrote the book that everyone always cites, Team Topologies, of course. So how is platform engineering different than DevOps? Or how is our understanding of DevOps or what DevOps should be or could be changed over the years? For someone who understands what DevOps is, right? Or for a DevOps engineer out there, what is platform engineering and how is that in any way different or similar to DevOps?
Good question. So I think for that, it's worthwhile going back in time a little bit. Just like nearly 11 years ago, actually now, coming up to 11 years ago, I wrote a blog post exploring different ways in which development and operation teams can work together effectively, including some ways in which they can work together or they can avoid working together effectively, so it becomes really ineffective. That's what, and I'll share my screen in a second, but that was the precursor to what became Team Topologies. So all the Team Topologies work came out of all of the learning from the whole first 10 years of the sort of DevOps movement, DevOps activities. That blog post ended up looking like this. I'm just going to share my screen, and it's this one here. So we ended up putting together a website called DevOps Topologies. You can still find it. It's devopstopologies.com. If you search for DevOps Topologies, you'll find it there. And I asked myself the question of this: what team structure is right for DevOps to flourish? And clearly, there's no one team structure, right? So we explored a whole load of different patterns. There's lots of what we call anti-types, so you can have development and operations completely separate, not talking to each other. That was the classic problem, throwing code over the wall and then it all kind of catching fire in the live environment. But a load of other different ways of arranging development and operations, which are not very effective. So we collected together a few patterns like that. And then we said, well, what might be some effective ways? And we called these the DevOps team topologies back then. A little bit of collaboration between two teams, maybe logging and monitoring or something. Maybe we blend the teams together fully, which is this type 2 thing. And then there's this type 3 thing, ops as infrastructure as a service, or platform is what we called it then. Here's another approach that can work. Anyway, these patterns end up being used by Netflix, Condé Nast International, consultancies like Accenture and so on to help them think through different ways of working inside organizations. And it was on the back of this that then we ended up approaching Gene Kim from IT Revolution. So Gene Kim, the author of Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook and so on, like a force of nature, basically, in the IT enterprise space. He and his team are absolutely amazing. So then our Team Topologies book was published through IT Revolution, his company. It's great to be part of that whole kind of like family. So I think it's fair to say the Team Topologies ideas and material were very much grounded in actual practice from about 2008. Once cloud became a thing and once DevOps took off, we learned a lot from that. Both Manuel, my co-author, and I were both heavily involved in that kind of space, working in there with our clients and customers, interviewing people, learning about how all this stuff works, comparing and contrasting, trying to reverse engineer what's going on, trying to look under the covers and trying to see what are the underlying dynamics, if you like. But crucially, we both, Manuel and I, were both interested in the team aspects, the human and social aspects of what's going on, not just the technology part.
So when a company like Netflix implemented DevOps practices, what did they do different than other companies that maybe implemented and weren't as successful?
So some of the things that the successful companies are doing, we can actually see articulated in the state of DevOps reports, the reports that came out from Puppet originally, and then Google got involved as well. And so some of those practices have been effectively assessed at scale. And there's the book Accelerate, also from IT Revolution. And so practices like doing continuous delivery, using cloud, prioritizing psychological safety, having community structures at different levels in the organization. These things are predictive of higher performance. And so this stuff is now known-ish, certainly inside some circles, although it's surprising how many organizations just haven't even seen any of the state of DevOps reports, haven't read the Accelerate book, any of this stuff. There's still a lot of persuading and showing people what's already there, what's already known, if you like, but there's still loads of people that haven't come across. And there's one particular practice that I first came across from a white paper from Pivotal Cloud Foundry. And I think that paper was published in 2014 or something. I was actually talking to one of the authors of that paper. I happened to meet the author of this white paper in London last week, which is amazing. Not completely by coincidence, but we were both at a DevOps conference, but I've not managed to meet the people who had authored the paper before. And this particular paper really gave me a light bulb moment. I can't remember the exact wording, and it's not available online anymore, sadly, but Pivotal Cloud Foundry was like quite an advanced technology for its time. It was like an opinionated technology application developers could develop apps and deploy on top of Pivotal Cloud Foundry and so on. And there was something about the way they talked about an opinionated separation between application developers and operations or infrastructure people, something like this. There was a way that they phrased it where it was like, bing, yes, that leads to success because there's a limited amount of brain space that humans have got. And to be honest, there's a limited amount of stuff that we should be dealing with anyway. If our main focus is on an application that's about bank transfers or an application that is about applying for a passport or whatever it is, that should be our main focus. We don't want to be distracted with all of the plumbing details that sit underneath all the time.
That's what you call a platform.
Well, and that's the point. I can't remember whether Pivotal Cloud Foundry called it a platform or not. They may have done.
That's what you call the platform in your book.
Well, so we were influenced, exactly. We were influenced by things like that, thinking, what's the real value of hiding a whole load of implementation details? Well, it reduces cognitive load. There is a danger if you hide too much that it oversimplifies things. So you do sometimes need to expose some details. We'll talk about that later, right? But one of the things it's doing is reducing the cognitive load, reducing the kind of amount of different stuff that we have to carry in our heads. And it allows a group of people to focus on something that's more like a higher level, if you like the application level stuff. They can focus more on that and not need to worry about all the other details. That kind of perspective turns out to be quite unusual for a lot of people, and that's what's now called platform engineering. And I've been living there in that world for whatever it is, 15 years or so, and probably used that perspective way back. But that perspective of deliberately hiding certain things so that people can actually have a better focus, it turns out to be quite unusual for lots of large organizations in particular, and that's what this kind of platform engineering thing is. It's really zooming into the user needs of people who are developing applications on top of a platform and saying, well, what would it take for them to have a really good experience in building and running services? I think that's, for me and you, that's like really obvious, but actually it's quite weird or quite new for some people.
Wait, so what you're saying though is, right, essentially as software engineers or developers or DevOps engineers, right, everything we deal with kind of has these abstraction layers, and every good framework or operating system like abstracts some things away and exposes others, right? Right, like Linux or Windows hides away the details on how a specific hard disk or SSD what operates, right? And you can move from a hard drive to solid state without your application having to care about the details. TCP/IP abstracts away details on protocols, abstract away these details. Everyone who writes a JavaScript application is typically using a framework like React or whatever that is also abstracting away details on the underlying DOM. But you're saying though, and the big breakthrough here is that you can actually apply the same sort of thing within your company to the company's specific domains, that like in the areas where you want to do something that is different, then everyone can focus on writing the business logic and like the stuff in those areas. But that there's benefits to having like kind of this broader standardized platform so that every engineer who's writing code doesn't have to worry about all the security concerns, all the like infrastructure concerns that they would have to worry about if they were just operating on the bare metal.
Exactly. And this is particularly important in where we're speaking in 2024. Go back 20 years, the level of complexity was way lower. Like these days, you've got to think about security certificates before you can even think about connecting to a website or a kind of web endpoint. 20 years ago, it was you only had secure SSL encryption on websites when you were logging in or when there was a credit card transaction happening, if you like. Like the nature of having to deal with the secure connection was something that you've just got around. You didn't really care about it most of the time. You just assumed someone else was going to handle it. But the level of, that's just one tiny example, the level of complexity around infrastructure, level of complexity around like monitoring and deployment and a whole bunch of other things, testing, different dimensions that we need to test for and so on. The amount of stuff we need to do and think about is way more than had to be dealt with 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's actually a good thing because the systems should be more secure, but the attack surface is getting bigger and the kind of the remit of software is getting bigger and bigger as well. So we're having to deal with more and more things. So we need to, if we're not dealing with cognitive load and mental load, we're going to be slowing down a huge amount because you're asking people to deal with all of this stuff. Really? We need to somehow help them to focus on the stuff which is actually like business or domain centric. And there's a lot of stuff that have effectively been that have been handled for them.
So I'm a really simple guy. Can I spit this back at you in my own words and you'll tell me if you agree with like how I'm interpreting this? I'd say there was, so as I understand it, what you're saying, kind of my own sense on this as well, is like there was kind of DevOps 0.0, right? We'll just call that ops. But that was like you have ops, you have dev, completely separate, throw it over the wall, as Werner Vogel said, right? Completely separate. One person develops, someone else operates. That didn't work because the person operating doesn't know all the development stuff, whatever, it didn't work well. Then there was DevOps like 1.0, which was actually a whole bunch of unrelated things bundled together. There was continuous delivery, right? Like you should always be shipping every day, or continuous delivery and continuous integration, all these other things. Then there was also breaking down silos, right? Actually, you shouldn't have, let's get rid of all the silos. And then after getting rid of all those silos, and there was like this whole shift left movement, right? With like, where we said, oh, devs should be responsible for security and shift it left, and devs should be responsible for the infrastructure provisioning. Devs should be responsible for this. Then like having that DevOps 1.0, we're removing all the silos. And it turned out that devs had to develop and worry about security and worry about this and worry about that. There was no time left over to actually develop anymore.
Exactly.
And the skill set for running modern infrastructure just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's okay. Of course, you need to know your application and the aspects that are relevant for infrastructure, but you shouldn't have to worry about the node, which specific node type on AWS you're using or is best, or you shouldn't have to worry about the Spot autoscaler. You shouldn't have to worry about like all these other concerns with the security. You should have some reduced surface of that. On the one hand, we want to break down silos. We want to involve you in the aspects where your input actually matters and you can make a difference. On the other hand, we don't want to break down the silos to the degree like completely where there's no such thing as independent ops anymore. Google certainly doesn't do that, right? They have a separate SRE practice. They like come to the ops model where they say SRE is so complicated to do, right? We'll have completely separate teams. So you don't want to break down the silos too much. So then there's this DevOps 2.0, you could call it, that takes the good part of DevOps, the continuous delivery, and it takes that good part about breaking down silos, but it also says we're not breaking down silos 100%. Like we're breaking down the silos, but we're building clear responsibility boundaries. And we'll say, you can think of it as like APIs, right? We're giving you a platform, we're giving you stuff where you can run your applications. These are the areas that we're interacting, and these are the areas that are our responsibility, and these are the areas that are your responsibility. So we're having like split responsibilities and communication, but we're not just saying there's no more ops, there's no more DevOps, you do everything, right? Or like, is that understanding approximately correct?
Yeah, there was a brief period, I can't remember what it was, like 2015, 2016 or something, where there was this kind of movement around no ops, like the idea of having just no operation people, which doesn't make any sense because there's always going to be a whole bunch of things that we need in place to support value delivery. And a lot of that stuff ends up looking operational. There are ways to make that operational stuff way more value stream centric, but we're providing value to internal customers at that point rather than external customers. Yeah, no ops doesn't make sense at all. There's one way of looking at this whole silo thing, which is historically there were silos that were based around functions, so development and test and release and operations. Breaking down those silos is super important. Some people see it, if you move to a flow-centric approach like Team Topologies or value stream centric, some people say, oh, well, we've got new silos now, which are the flow boundaries. And I don't really disagree with that, because
Wait, could you explain the whole flow thing for someone who's new to this?
yeah, so like in our starting point in Team Topologies is, what would it take to have a single team of about 8 people with multiple different skills, so cross-functional, own a product, service, user journey, value stream, own that end to end. You build it, you run it. Define it, they're responsible for it, they're on call for it, they look after that thing all the time. And there's no handoff to another team. They've got end-to-end responsibility for that thing. So we say, what would it take for that team to be able to do that effectively? So we want them to be autonomous, decoupled, be able to go very quickly. They can detect that they see the production telemetry. They see the fact that the service is down. They can restore service. They've got access to all the logs, all of that kind of stuff. There's no handoff to another team. They can bring that service back again. They've deployed a fix in 10 minutes. So I've literally worked, and you've worked in these kind of organizations.
Right, so I like that because you're all in the same room and there's no, like everyone's there around the table almost, right?
Yeah, it's a shared kind of ownership or stewardship of that thing. You're looking after it. You're caring for it. So we say, what would it take for a team to be able to do that? And to begin with, the team might be able to do everything. They might be able to start and look after all the infrastructure, all of the data ingress, all of the security aspects, patching, blah, blah, blah. Great. If you can continue to look after that independently, and this stream of value is truly independent, if we found a good boundary for flow, then just continue with that for as long as you want. But at some point, there might be so much time that team is spending on the plumbing and infrastructure and a bunch of other things that they're not able to focus enough on the actual value delivery to the customer, whoever the customer is.
Meaning you'd get to a situation where every team in the organization is doing this, then you have all these redundancies and everyone is like spending time on spinning up their own AWS account. There's like no standardization. Everyone's doing something, doing all these common things on their own.
And typically in most organizations, that approach where you've got like 100 teams and they're all managing their own separate cloud infrastructure or separate data pipelines and things, there could be a scenario in which that is valuable. I'm not saying that's definitely wrong.
I don't know anyone who does that.
Well, exactly. And for most organizations, it wouldn't make sense. So for most organizations, what you want to have is some kind of good practice that's been codified, like a beacon or a magnet, saying, hey, folks, look, here's a way of doing things which is really straightforward. And we've thought about the user experience, and we've dealt with all of these security and audit and compliance requirements. Come and use our version. Now, in Team Topologies, if that thing is improving flow by reducing cognitive load, we call that a platform.
So what you're saying is, like, in a utopic world, and this doesn't work for all these reasons, but like every team is just a flow stream, right? Every team would have, again, this doesn't work. We'll evolve it in a second. You're saying in an ideal world, every team has within it like the UX, the engineer, the ops, like all the people needed, and they're all like sitting around the table. They're all delivering value to the customer, and then everything is super fast, and everyone is always in flow. But that, of course, breaks down, and no large organization works like that because you have all these redundancies, and then you don't have compliance, and everyone does their own thing. So it doesn't work. It's not manageable in a large organization. So essentially, like platforms And like these team topologies are about how you get the benefits of that, like that, and keep the flow that you would have in that utopic team while still being in the real world, like with compliance and with standardization.
Exactly. And that's effectively then what platform engineering enables, because we can go fast at speed because we've dealt with things like we've provided a route to easy audit compliance or a route to easy security patching updates or something because the platform is providing it. But the focus is on enabling the streamlined teams, these end-to-end teams, enabling the streamlined teams to retain their independence, to retain that end-to-end flow in an effective way. So we're taking away some of that cognitive load and
Okay,
pulling it
yeah.
into the
Meaning like
platform.
we're now SOC 2 compliant at Robusta. So like even to
Yeah,
do SOC 2 compliance, like that was a huge pain. I imagine if like every team in the company had to do SOC 2 compliance, no one would ever get anything else done. So what you're saying is you start off with this world where you just have a small team, right? Or if you look at the evolution of a company, like you start with a company where you have that more streamlined teams where like everyone's in the same room doing the same thing. Then as the company grows and the evolution of a company, you eventually, it actually becomes slower to work in that mode because each team is doing so much. And like within those teams, now you have to have all these duplicate functions and everyone has to worry about, in each of those teams, they have to worry about compliance and SOC 2 and provisioning the infrastructure. They have to worry about all these other things. So eventually you can move them out, even as a parallel. Like you wouldn't want every team to have their own HR function, right? That wouldn't make sense. You have all this redundancy. It doesn't make sense for every team to have all the expertise. So then the question is, how do you move stuff out of those teams into these central teams that give that as a platform, but do that in a way that actually makes everyone move faster, not move slower, be like
exactly.
dependent on that central team.
Exactly. So it's a dynamic. It's always a dynamic. Always thinking about the new technologies that are available, whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's some new cloud thing or whatever. We're always thinking about new capabilities. We're thinking about, do we train people up? Do we add some additional skills into the team? Do we build something, a new service that makes things easier to enhance the user experience? There's lots of different ways of getting better flow and reducing cognitive load. But then the platform becomes a key part of that because it can offer like a refined version of a thing to multiple different teams, and therefore we're getting benefit of doing that thing at scale.
And that's what you call fast flow.
We get fast flow value towards a value consumer, wherever the value consumer is, whether they're external or whether they're internal inside the organization.
I've been on teams where I was on a team once where we did something really innovative within the team, right? And we were doing something that was like beyond actually what was going on in the organization, around like really cool stuff that we were doing with data analysis and stuff. We built something really cool, and then it was never adopted in the large organization. And like time went by, and some of the people were, everyone who worked on it, like left the company. It was just lost, and it ended up being this thing that like actually became a maintenance burden because no one knew how to use it. Right? It never turned into this big that could make people aware of like how you should use things and how to do it. I'll give you a concrete example, okay, that we see all the time, especially around on-call. Companies have adopted good modern architecture. They have some event processing architecture, Kafka or RabbitMQ, right? And they built something, and then the people originally built that moved on. That system remains in place, but and it's the right architecture. Then like other people come along who don't even know how to interact with that architecture. They get another at 2 a.m. in the morning, and they don't even know how to go about like troubleshooting that and handling that because it's an architecture that's new to them or something that they're not as familiar with.
Some way of rapidly onboarding to that way of working or that particular technology or that dynamic, some way of onboarding people rapidly onto that is going to be massively helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so let me phrase it differently. What are some of the challenges that people have then around knowledge sharing and around actually going and implementing these topologies? So you implement a platform team. What are the common challenges that you might have on day two? Or you build a platform with different areas of responsibilities. Maybe there's a database platform that you offer to other teams.
So the challenges around just mindset for a start, getting people to think in terms of accelerating innovation for the teams that use the platform, a really key mindset. What can we do to make the lives of people easier who are going to use this platform? What's the user experience or developer experience? And let's go and assess that. Let's go and literally sit down next to these people and see how they use this tool. Or helping people who are going to use these services from the platform to onboard very quickly. Is that documentation? Could be. Is it some kind of nicely annotated API? Could be. There's a bunch of ways to do it. But clearly, it's a combination of these kind of things to be able to onboard people quickly into, be able to get the most out of those platform services in the way that they need from their perspective, their application delivery perspective. And there's a whole heap of other problems. A big one is this shift from traditional kind of infrastructure. We're building some technology into platform which we're providing a service which meets some human need.
Meaning you're going from being a developer to being, to some degree, a product owner, right? Like you're going
definitely that shift.
You're now to some degree like a product manager, and you have to do customer support, but the customers are within your own company.
Well, we certainly have to understand customer needs at the very least, understand what those customer needs are, and then meet those in various different ways. Yeah, exactly. Rather than just thinking about the technology, we're thinking about the end-to-end kind of customer value. Who are our customers? Oh, they're our colleagues, they're internal. Okay, what are their needs? Let's go and find out. Let's actually go and bridge that gap between what they need and can provide. And there's lots of different ways to do that. It starts with talking to people.
Yeah. So I see there's a question from Titchman in the chat. And sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I may be butchering that, but I apologize.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for your question. Would you consider a team managing a Kubernetes as a service offering a stream-aligned team or a platform team? Great question. This was not a planted question. So here's the thing. In Team Topologies terms, a platform is really like a grouping of other teams. That's really how to see it. So you can just choose to zoom out a bit and just see a kind of platform as a single entity, or you can zoom in and look inside that platform and you'll see multiple different teams. And inside there, you see what we call stream-aligned teams. They've got an end-to-end flow of value. And that particular value might be providing Kubernetes as a service to some internal customers. So in one sense, they're a stream-aligned team when you look inside the platform. When you zoom out a bit, they're a team that sits inside a platform that provides infrastructure. So it's both, to be honest. It's both at the same time. That's a powerful property of the Team Topologies terminology and way of thinking. We can zoom in and we can zoom out of different parts of the organization. It's very useful to be able to do that because, you know what, cognitive load, sometimes it's worth zooming in. Sometimes you don't need that level of detail and you can abstract it a bit.
So the challenge we see with a lot of the customers who come to us is that you're abstracting things away, right? And you're trying to reduce the cognitive load. That works really well, but then the challenge is you're also making people more distant from the underlying technology. And sometimes they still have to go and troubleshoot. You might take the burden of the people for running all the Kubernetes themselves. And of course, like in a large enterprise, you have to. You can't expect every application team to be OpenShift administrators. That would never, ever work. But on the other hand, everyone still has to interact with that OpenShift or that Kubernetes or whatever platform you built on top of that. And then a lot of times people come to us when they're at the point where they're struggling to keep up with the number of tickets that those customers are opening for their platform. Like my pod isn't working, it's crashing. How do I troubleshoot that? Or like I have that Kafka issue and I don't know how to troubleshoot.
From a platform perspective, we want to try and make it as self-service as possible. We want to empower the stream-aligned teams to be able to self-serve the solution to their problems themselves. We should be providing enough logs and telemetry and metrics for them to be able to dive down and try and fix a problem. We need to provide enough access to the right kind of aspects of the infrastructure so they can go and deal with that stuff themselves, or at least get to the point where they've diagnosed a problem and we've being able to remediate the problem, do a fail forward or some sort of fix quickly enough. The aim is not to create a whole batch of load of Jira tickets or ServiceNow tickets asking the platform team to do some more work. That doesn't make any sense. That's not going to lead to a place of fast flow. And so when we're designing a platform, whatever kind of platform it is, whether it's data, infrastructure, design, a whole bunch of things, we still need to understand the user needs. And user needs are not just when we're developing something, but when we're diagnosing a problem in life. And so some of the needs there are, we've got a need to effective diagnosis and resolution of a problem. So we might need from the platform to provide enough, expose enough details or provide a special like tool that helps them fix a problem or whatever it is. And that's part of what the platform is providing. Expose detail, basically.
So you would view what we do at Robusta as being the troubleshooting side of the platform. It's an interesting perspective on that, right? Because we tend to think of it as more an AI assistant, right? Or a co-pilot, like for solving alerts. But what you're saying actually is the way you would view that is you built a Kubernetes platform or an OpenShift platform or whatever platform it is, right? We do a lot of Kubernetes, so I'm sorry, all my examples are there. But you built this Kubernetes platform or base platform or whatever and giving it to developers. But that's only half the work, giving them this part they can build on. The other half is giving them the tools to properly troubleshoot that into their own without opening a ticket for you. Tools there go into being part of that platform.
And that's why, to be honest, that's why we're here talking today, to be honest, because I like the perspective that you've got at Robusta on that kind of self-service aspect, helping those streamlined teams to self-serve and to learn on the job as we discover more remediation steps or more different ways of solving a problem, that you're bringing that stuff to the service. We'll probably have a look in a minute as you dive into it. But just that mindset of our purpose here is in this tool or this service or whatever, our purpose is to help these stream-aligned teams to retain their autonomy and independence so they can go quickly. And we're taking some of that cognitive load away from them.
I think for us, the breakthrough was when we were speaking to some early adopters and they said to us, we were speaking about how we troubleshoot different things. And they said, oh, we know exactly how to troubleshoot those. Like we have runbooks, we have Confluence pages, but the developers never look at them. It shifted that into how do we put your knowledge into the platform, meaning not how do we just build something that gives the answers, but how do we give the team that are building these platforms, whether it's a Kubernetes platform or a database platform, or whatever kind of platform it is, how do we give them an easy way to say, okay, here's how we would troubleshoot that. Here are the best practices. Now, whenever a dev has a problem, say the dev opening a Jira ticket and then us following those practices and then going back and answering the dev, that give the dev the ability to say, here's my problem, and to get that done automatically with GenAI and to automate some of that and then to get right back the answer and keep them in your terms, keep them in flow, because now it happens in 30 seconds instead of 24-hour turnaround on the ticket.
Exactly. You're kind of guiding them. You're walking with them to help retain their independence rather than them having to wait on someone else to do something. And then you're empowering that team.
But then the platform team put the stuff in there, because I think that was the key breakthrough for us, realizing that out of the box, we, or even like the best AI model, right? Even when GPT-5 comes out or whatever, won't know how to troubleshoot a lot of this stuff on your platform, because by definition, it's your platform. Why do that? Someone put in instructions, just like they would build a platform, they can build the troubleshooting part just by giving instructions. Like when this problem happens, here's how I would troubleshoot. And then not just surfacing up those instructions to the developer, but actually having it call the right APIs and do all that troubleshooting for the dev.
Exactly. You're baking in, you're embedding the knowledge from experts. You're embedding that expert knowledge into the way in which application teams or stream-aligned teams can actually self-serve and look after their service or product or application themselves. That's super powerful. It's a very different way of thinking about knowledge and expertise and team boundaries and things. 180 degrees away from what happened in the 1990s and 2000s, where you had this huge, great separation between these two groups. You're now actively expecting to empower these streamlined teams to be able to self-serve to the greatest extent that is sensible.
Yeah, because we sometimes see places, or we hear from people who say, okay, we have trouble. Our developers don't know how to troubleshoot things. So we're going to add on like a new APM, or we're going to add on new tracing tools, or do distributed tracing. And then they go and they adapt all those things. But the developers don't know how to use those either. So you have all the data. Now you have even more data, but people still don't know where to go and look. Because I think what you're saying is it's all about reducing cognitive load. And sometimes by trying to fix the problem, you can actually add on even more cognitive load, in which case you would end up accomplishing the opposite goal.
Yeah, it's all about trying to work out how we empower the streamlined teams to retain their independence. And so then there's always a negotiation about how much kind of responsibility and detail they take on in order to be able to do that. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's, well, in this context, this team needs this amount of awareness, and another team might be happy with less awareness or more awareness, and that's fine, and that's what they're happy to run with. So some options around that from an opinionated tool end up being really valuable, this whole space.
I think you said earlier, it's about what do they need in order to deliver value independently? How do you decouple them so that they can not worry about the details, but also be decoupled and not dependent on other people? So I guess that balance changes from team to team and from platform. I think there's a question in the chat that Fortune asked.
Fortune.
How does, in a practical matter on a day-to-day basis, how would this change the roadmap for what your team is building or your attitude?
It might also relate to what we were talking about before with seeing a platform grouping and then zooming in or zooming out of that platform. I think it's a great question, Fortune. I think what we end up with is wherever that team is in the organization, it needs to be aware of whether it is part of a platform grouping, providing services out to other internal teams, or whether it's truly like external facing and it's got like an external value consumer of some kind. In reality, the most important thing that a team needs to know is who is the value consumer, what's the value we're providing, where do they sit, what are their needs, and if they're not a streamlined team of any kind, maybe there might be an enabling team or there might be a complicated subsystem team, then they need to be aware of their behaviors can be somewhat different compared to a value producing team that has a value consumer. Whether or not you sit in a platform, in a big enterprise, almost every team is in some kind of platform grouping, to be honest, providing services out to other teams. So we just need to get used to that. We need to get used to that mindset idea, which is embedded in the robusta tool, which our purpose inside this platform, really, as part of this platform, is to improve flow and we reduce cognitive load for the teams that use our services. I think that mindset is the most important one.
You're a DevOps engineer, and maybe your boss or your company has not bought into or has not made this kind of shift in their thinking. But what are ways that you could apply that and to maybe make that even more concrete? You're a DevOps engineer and you get a task, set up the infrastructure for this team. Then in the older way of thinking, you would just go and you would set up the infrastructure and do it for them. And then you're expecting down the road, a ticket will come to you for changing the infrastructure for them. But now when you try to apply this platform engineering thinking, maybe within your pocket, even without the big organizational change, it's now around how do I set it up so that the team that I'm building it for will be able to change the right knobs on their own? Is that accurate?
That's certainly the way I see it. Yeah. Be interesting to hear if anyone's on the call. Drop a comment in the chat. Give us your experience, what you've been through maybe in this space, but certainly that mindset of what would it take so that we're empowering another team to do this in a safe, effective, rapid way. That's the point. We're empowering other teams rather than taking in that work ourselves and then other teams waiting on us. We're setting things up so that effectively another team can press a button and bing, they've got what they need.
So there's another question there. I think I'm happy to take the AI aspect on that. Do you want to take the first part of that?
From Thunderhill, how responsibility and power politics, like owning the platform and team dynamics, works. Will there be any AI bias, bad play role here? That's really interesting. That's an entire webinar. Take the AI apart for a second. And then I think it's probably worth looking at the example of the robusta tool and seeing how that actually plays out.
I want to speak about that responsibility model as well. Imagine you're an e-commerce shop and you're running some applications, and one of your applications has high latency for customer checkout. So you have an HTTP endpoint that the customers use to check out, right? And now there's high latency on that, so someone has to go and troubleshoot that. And in a real company, and something like this could actually have a lot of different areas of responsibility. We're going back to that question now on politics and on responsibility. When you're looking at something like this, right? And the first on-call responder would probably be the team whose application this is, right? Whoever owns that checkout application. And then what you want to get to, though, is they're actually dependent on all these different platforms. They're dependent on the platform for, I don't know, the whoever maintains like the ingress and the Kong and the infrastructure. They may be dependent on the database platform. They're dependent on all these other areas. And to actually go about and troubleshoot an issue like this, like you're starting from your application, but to be effective and to actually troubleshoot this and like find the cause and to solve that, you're going to have to touch on all these other platforms that exist within your company, and at least look at them from the outside and say, are these working properly? Maybe sometimes even look a little bit beyond or ask those teams for help, or like we spoke before, maybe get some automated assistance around those platforms. So the way we at least think about this is when you have an issue like this, if your application has some issue, then what we want to do is we want to tap all that organizational knowledge and be able to take that there and run an investigation on that. So here's an explanation of that. Okay, that's just a simple explanation. But then go off and investigate each one of those services that it depends on in the organization. And what each service owner, what each platform owner can do is they can actually add on details on like how their service would be troubleshooted. So you can think of it as I'm on call, I'm responding to this alert. I'm going in, I'm looking at a problem. If this involves these pieces of infrastructure that other people have built, they can put in their own knowledge on how to troubleshoot those issues. And that is just used by this AI engine to automatically investigate and to surface up that data and to give that to me in a way that doesn't increase the cognitive load, because now there's another component that I'm afraid of that I don't interact with, that I don't know how to troubleshoot, but to make it less scary, to surface up that data automatically, to do so exactly the platform team that owns that component would go and do themselves. So to loop back to a concrete example, here we have there's high latency on some HTTP endpoint. We can go off and automatically investigate that. In this case, look at the Kubernetes deployment, look at the pods, look at the logs. Oh, the logs show there's an issue connecting to the database, right? So we found this database connectivity issue. Oh, now we go off and we investigate that. And what's really cool, and it ties into that platform thinking, is that each team can go in here and they can put in here instructions on a specific alert, or for their database service, or for the Kubernetes service, for the relevant parts of the infrastructure. How would you go about investigating that? So one company that we work with is a big user of Glue. I believe it's an API gateway. And what they put in there is, okay, when you have these certain families of issues, you would go off, you would like search the Glue ingress logs or errors related to the application name, right? Then go off and do this. And then automatically when an issue occurs, that's used in this root cause. Like the AI engine will go off and apply the practices that team would use to troubleshoot it, and then tell you like, oh, here's the problem. And now maybe reach out to that team if it's an issue where you need to dig into that deeper.
So the AI engine is significantly accelerating the time to diagnosis. It's significantly accelerating the time to pull that stuff together, which is what human beings used to do back in the day. They had to keep it in their head, or they had to go and find Jim or Sarah or whoever it was who knew about these things. But what it's doing is doing that for you. It's bringing all that stuff together in a single place, where it hopefully accelerates time to diagnosis. We can restore service more quickly. People have learned things along the way, because we've got, well, instead of being overloaded by having to go all do the finding, we're actually presenting all that stuff in a single place, which is then, that's cool. I can see all that stuff together. I trust it. It's being collected for me, and it's live. It's active. It's looking at the logs. It's looking at a bunch of other things, right? And so we're reducing cognitive load effectively because we're zooming in on diagnosis at this point, rather than having to work out where to get that information from.
Yeah. So to go back for a second to what Thunder Hill said about AI bias playing a bad role, like what becomes key is that you are able to put your knowledge into that, and to be able to not have an AI go off and just investigate on general things, but to investigate on how your team troubleshoot. So if you're owning a certain Kubernetes platform, the OpenShift platform, and you have this internal expertise, or you have these runbooks in Confluence, or your Envoy team or your NOC team has certain practices or SOPs, like standard operating procedures that they follow when investigating, to make that available to all the end users automatically. So it's not about the AI like having a bias on how it investigates. It's about being able to put in your own knowledge on how you investigate that, and then make that available to all the developers who are going and using that.
Yeah, this whole challenge of finding ways to share awareness and knowledge about different aspects, and then making that available to people at the right time, is absolutely key. One of the things that we're doing at Conflux is helping organizations with active knowledge diffusion, but on a much more regular and planned time frame compared to what you're doing. But both are really valuable. So like things like internal conferences and lunch and learn and communities of practice and so on. So there's a dynamic between these two approaches. Like your stuff is like as needed. We're in the middle of an incident. We need to pull together the awareness of how to diagnose it. We can take the learning from that and then do a talk at a lunchtime conference or a blog post about it. The speed with which we can now create that blog post about resolving that incident is way higher, because we've got all the stuff there in that kind of incident, or that root cause analysis that the GenAI pulled out for us. That could be the start of that blog post. Effectively, we're actually accelerating cross-organizational learning precisely because the GenAI is pulling together this stuff in a way which is, to be honest, would be quite boring to do by the human. The GenAI is doing it for us. That's like a springboard that we can learn across the organization more about how to diagnose these particular problems or whatever it is.
Yeah, so one really cool thing we're doing, I'm going to share my screen again. We have a workaround for in the platform today. I'll explain, but it's not there 100% yet, but it's there. Is you have an alert here, right? You have high latency, or you have some issue in one of your pods, whatever, right? And you've ran this root cause analysis, and you've probably discussed this issue internally. Maybe you have that lunch and learn. You have that discussion, and maybe there's a post-mortem as well, right? So one of the things that we're looking at is actually being able to just link in here the post-mortems. Here is a post-mortem from
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I say it's a workaround because like this would work if it has access to it. We have some tools to fetch stuff from URLs or components, but you still have to configure it first. But
Yep.
one thing we're going to do is make it more obvious and tap here like a section where it says post-mortem. You just put in the links on that. And
particularly if you started with the post-mortem and then went backwards to look at the details. And then so when someone needs to know about a particular kind of thing, you can actually go straight back to the real examples of that.
yeah,
kind of problem.
we would pull it in. Like the first thing the AI engine would do was it would pull in just there's here the other explanation. Oh, there was a similar issue in the past. Here's how it was troubleshooted. And then what's cool is like the investigation here is actually live. Like when we say here's this alert for each high latency, right? Describe the customer orders, check the pod status, fetch the current logs, whatever. And you can see the actual data that it went off and gathered. Here's all the data it actually went off and gathered. Here are the logs that relied upon. So being able to actually see, oh, I used this previous post-mortem, and then I went to the exact steps that were listed in that post-mortem to investigate, is really cool. Because you then close that loop on this continuous learning and building, if you look at it as building a platform that gets better over time according to the trouble, like according to the needs of your customers. And then you look at the troubleshooting, I like how you framed it earlier on, like the troubleshooting part is a platform that you're also building. That platform is continuously built according to customer needs by definition, because like it's interacting with people, they're solving issues, they're asking follow-up questions over here, right? And they're doing all that, and then that data will be able to just feed back in.
Exactly. We're helping people to self-serve on the knowledge and learning, not just on the incident diagnosis itself, but then we're connecting it through to that cycle of learning and expectation that we're always going to have a whole bunch of stuff, new stuff we need to learn. And setting up the organization for success like this, using tools in this particular way, feels to me super powerful.
Yeah. And I think Neophytus had a question there as well on what you would do if people are less familiar with Kubernetes or OpenShift. And you can just tune that sort of thing. So you can say here when referring to Kubernetes concepts, always explain them, right? Like you can tell, like you can give instructions on what sort of output it should give.
And that's instructions to the GenAI, correct?
Yeah. So this is all used by GenAI. It's a little bit of an architecture that people aren't familiar with. Essentially, what we're doing is we're going to an LLM and we're feeding in, like the dumbest thing that you could do, which wouldn't work, is that you could copy paste this alert to ChatGPT and say like, why did this alert high latency customer checkout fire? And it wouldn't know because like, how could it know? Because it doesn't have access to your environment. So essentially what we're doing is we're feeding it in to an LLM and saying, given this alert, not why is it firing, but given this alert, what API calls would you make to gather data? Or where would you fetch logs from? Or what metrics would you pull? What graphs and Grafana would you look at? We're asking all those questions and it has a whole bunch of integrations. And then we do that like outside of GenAI, we gather all that data and then we feed it back in and say, okay, like we did those things. Now what would you do? And then it says, oh, well, now like these pod logs mention that pod. So now go off and fetch the data on that pod. And it goes off and investigates that pod. So what we're doing is essentially like using GenAI to sequence a bunch of API calls to observability tools to gather data, and then using GenAI to summarize it. So it's actually a more limited role in that we're not just asking it, what is the root cause? How can it know? We're asking what data should we gather to investigate? And then like, how would you summarize the results of what you found in that data?
And so then if 9 times out of 10 or 19 times out of 20 is actually pretty accurate, then that's way better than it was before, because you actually save people a lot of time. People are able to use this to learn better, and in the future they'll know which of these options are the ones that are likely to be the real calls, if you like. So like, it's a part of that on-ramp for learning how to diagnose in this case and how to think about the systems.
Yeah, and for upskilling your team, like you may have an issue here, I don't know, queue deployment, rollout stuck. You may have here some issue that is a very specific Kubernetes issue with like best practices on how you would go about troubleshooting this issue. And the first time that you look at this as a new engineer on the team, or if you're more junior or new to Kubernetes, you may not know exactly how to go off and troubleshoot that issue. But like we have the knowledge in here, so here's an explanation. Here's why it went off and investigated. And oh, this is due to unbound persistent volumes, and here's some recommendations on how to go and fix that, and so on, right? So it's about ultimately upskilling your team to know more and more of these over time. And going back to that question again from Neophytus, yeah, you can put in here, because we're using the GenAI to summarize the results, you can tell it like when you summarize these results, explain those Kubernetes concepts, like you can adjust this. I like what you said earlier about having to adjust things like for the right level of awareness that each team has. So you can tune it to give explanations to your team in the areas that you want.
Exactly. Cool. Natan, thank you so much. I loved our chat. I love the tool. It's great to see this stuff happening and working, and to see the Team Topologies and Fastflow ideas like being made real inside real tooling. Where can people find more information? Where would you like people to contact you, and where do you want to send them next effectively?
So the other investigation aspects are currently in beta, and while in beta, free to use. So anyone who is interested can sign up at robusta.dev, robusta.dev. And people are more than welcome as well to reach out and to jump on the call with us. We're happy to work with people and help them set it up. And,
I think we'll do some follow-up posts and things as well, when we'll pull together some of the stuff we talked about today and turn that into some kind of downloadable or shareable takeaways coming over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Matthew. I think I've learned a few new things as well today, and stuff that I can take away to how we're building this.
Me too. At Conflux, we help to build alignment and trust and engagement across your organization when delivering fast flow. So just head over to confluxhq.com/align and you'll find some useful information there. Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, get in touch. We'll follow up. We'll send you links to the recording. We'll send you some more stuff as Robusta and Conflux work together on this stuff over the next few weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.